tech guy. I can help get your presentation on here. Yeah.
Okay, great. I will, let me get settled.
Hold it here, no one's ever going to hear you. It won't pick up, but if you hold it right here, it will.
Full house today. So if there are empty seats in the center of you, like in the center of the rows, if you don't mind moving in, I know it's a little housekeepy thing, but we want to make sure we can offer plenty of room for folks coming in. There's still folks getting coffee. We're thrilled to have you. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes.
Those are here. This is live. So they're going to stay right here. Nobody's introducing us. Curt are here. I mean, you don't have to read all of them. No, all of it.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Wild Center. My name is Jen Kretser, and I'm the Director of Climate Initiatives at the museum. And I'm so happy to welcome everyone from close by and far away. I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of people that I haven't met before, and I am really excited to get to hopefully connect with all of you here today. For how many of you is it your first time here at the Wild Center? Yes, welcome. So special things to look out for. You know, we're going to be all over the museum today, and I'll share a little bit more in a moment about our agenda. But we are the otters. The otters will be out at lunchtime. So if you haven't seen our otters yet, everybody wants to know when the otters will be out. So I'll just tell you now that they'll be out at lunch. And so you'll get to meet them. But again, we're so thrilled to welcome you all here today for the Adirondack Climate Conference. Before we begin, I'd like to just do a brief land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that where I stand and where the Wild Center is located are the ancestral lands and original territory of the Haudenosaunee people. The original people of this place have deep knowledge of the land gained over 1,000 of years of observation. As a science center, we too gain knowledge about the natural world through careful observation about a particular place and a natural system. At the Wild Center, we believe the wisdom of the Haudenosaunee people, along with their gratitude for all parts of the natural world, can guide a better human and nature coexistence. To our Haudenosaunee friends, neighbors, and partners, we appreciate and respect your willingness to share some of your knowledge so that we can work together to steward these lands for future generations. I'd like to do a huge shout out to all of the sponsors that have helped bring this conference and make it come to life. The conference is being presented by 80K Solar and sponsored by Brookfield Renewable, Northern Power and Light, the Institute of Climate Studies, 475 High Performance Building Supply, the Adirondack Council, the Nature Conservancy, Third Act, Adirondack Diversity Initiative, ANCA, and the Rochester Regional Health Network. We're really grateful to them, as well as to our partners here at the Wild Center, Paul Smith College, and the Adirondack Research Consortium. So let's give them a little round of applause for helping to make this day possible. I also want to do a huge shout out to all of our speakers that are here today and to all of the folks that made their way here. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Zoe Smith.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zoe Smith, and I'm with Paul Smith College. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, and I want to welcome you today. It's great to see so many faces. If you look around, you will see a diverse group of partners here representing the arts, community services, science, education, our local government, our state government, forestry, agriculture, our indigenous communities, and more. This cross-section of such diverse partners demonstrates the dedication that we all have for the success of our communities. I'd like to give a special welcome to NYSERDA and the Adirondack Foundation, who has been funding our partnership over the last year. Thank you for your leadership and your support. I'd also like to give a special welcome to the Akwesasne St. Regis Mohawk Tribe, the New York State DEC, the Adirondack Park Agency, Department of Labor, Department of State, and the Tug Hill Commission, who are all here today. Later on this afternoon, we're honored to have the Deputy Secretary of State, Keisha Santiago, join us from the New York State Department of State, so you'll be hearing remarks from her as well. I'm also excited to welcome all of our municipal leaders who are here. We have middle school, high school, homeschool, and college students and teachers here today. We have region-wide and statewide nonprofits, businesses, and organizations. And if you're here as just an interested citizen, thank you so much for spending your day with us today. So we are here today under the ACORN, or under the umbrella, of ACORN, which stands for the Adirondack Climate Outreach and Resilience Network. For those of you who are not familiar with ACORN, this is a collaborative effort to share our resources and build a network for climate resilience across our rural North Country communities. We recognize that the challenges we all face are shared challenges. They're interconnected, and they require a shared solution. So this conference we're about a year long into the ACORN partnership, and this conference comes at a time where we really want to bring people together face to face so we can talk about the issues that we all face. We've been holding several listening tours around the North Country, which you'll hear about later, and in the end, we are building a network and a rural roadmap for the North Country. So today is an opportunity for you all to share, to learn, and really to build partnerships. So thank you again for spending your day with us, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sunita.
Thank you all for being here, North Country friends. This is awesome. I am the project coordinator of the Adirondack Climate Outreach and Resilience Network, which you'll be hearing about all day. And it is so special that we are all getting together today on this topic of climate resilience. And just having the opportunity to showcase how amazing you all are. It means so much. It's so inspiring. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that those of us in this room and beyond are some of the best people on the planet. We all in the North Country, we get things done. We do it on a shoestring, and we do it with really deep care and awareness for this place that we've chosen to live and work. And we're all benefiting from each other's work. So thank you, all of you, so much. If there's one guiding theme for our day together today, and all the work that we collectively do every day in our jobs, it's the theme of social cohesion. The togetherness, the interconnectedness, and the neighborliness of our region. Studies around the world have shown that places with higher levels of social cohesion, where people are looking out for each other and realizing that we all depend upon each other, they have higher levels of safety and survivability. And if you want to hear some of those anecdotes, get me out there, because there are amazing stories that people have actually done research on about social cohesion. When you look at this social cohesion in the North Country, you realize that our region really is a 14-county neighborhood, and we are all neighbors. As Zoe said, we have so many interesting overlaps in the room. We have a lot of connections already in the room, and so we want to keep that going throughout the day. And we want to use this moment as a preliminary opportunity for you to get to know each other a little better. So we're going to do a quick icebreaker. And so just use this to keep that energy of like connecting all throughout the day. What I'm going to have you do is notice how this slide says, turn to your neighbors. So I want you to turn to your neighbors on the north, the east, the south, and the west, and share with them your name, your affiliation, where you live, and what you love about your particular community. And you have 4 minutes. Go! Or less.
Okay, we're gonna bring it back. I love, 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 love all the buzz in the room. I love it. I hope that level of excitement and energy to connect with others continues throughout the day. That's just so great. Okay, we're gonna keep moving here. We got a packed agenda. So if you've looked at the agenda, you know that we have a lot going on. And if you're like me, you're like, oh my God, I want to go to all of this. How will we do that? Well, you really can't. But each of our speakers that are here today, each of these sessions could be a conference, a workshop, a week-long retreat on their own. So we know it's packed. We know the sessions are short, and there's going to be a lot of processing and learning. Think of it as like a smorgasbord of like all giant buffet, and you're going around, you're just like sampling little things, and like eventually you're going to go back and get more, because everyone's bringing so many topics and knowledge and experience, not just our speakers, but our attendees, all of you. We want to follow up later with more work. This is meant to be a catalyst to more things that will happen. So this is not the last of events that you'll hear from us or from others that are here today. And there's just a taste here of all the amazing North Country problem solvers and creative folks that are here in the room. We have incredible staff that will be in all of the workshop spaces taking notes. So if you do miss out, you'll have a chance to check the notes, and lots of opportunity to network. And so you streaming all of the plenary sessions, which are all of the presentations here in this room, in the Naturalist Cabinet, which if you go to the glacier, hang a left, you'll see it. It's right over there. And so if you want a little more space or like just to hang out, there's lots of space in there to watch the live stream. All of the plenaries are also being recorded, and we'll have for posterity purposes, and we can let you know when those get up on our website and available. We'll have lunch today. There is a whole compost system set up for those of you that grabbed food this morning. So there'll be folks there to help you out with our compost system as we try to keep this as low waste as possible. And I also just want to mention that during lunch today, there'll be one special guest that'll come out and meet you all, but also some of our incredible AmeriCorps here at the Wild Center will be sharing some of their climate stories and knowledge in the planet Adirondack, which is a giant sphere. Go to the glacier, make a right, you can't miss it. So now, I just want to again thank all of our sponsors, and I'm going to turn it over to Zoe to introduce our first plenary speakers. Matt's going to come.
All right, well, I have the great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Amanda Stevens, who's a senior project manager at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA, and she leads innovative projects focused on advancing New York State's clean energy transition and our ambitious climate goals at the state level. Her work spans renewable energy development, energy efficiency programs, policy implementation, and an emphasis on fostering collaboration across public and private sectors, and we're really excited you could join us, Amanda. Thank you.
Sorry.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. It's really great I was born and raised in Watertown, so we're not quite this east, but definitely North Country. So very nice to be here with you all. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the New York State Climate Impacts Assessment. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what it is, how it was developed, talk to you a little bit about some highlights of what you can find on the website. There's a lot there, so I just want to walk you through some of that information. And then I'll just talk a little bit about some highlights of the results that we get to. And I will say there is another session later today that delves deeper into the assessment work, so putting in a plug for that session. So what is this? It was a scientific investigation into how climate change is already affecting New York and how it's going to affect it in the future. It was really focused on the physical climate changes, so projections, how the climate's going to change here in the state, the impacts of those projections and those changes on different sectors of the state, and how we can plan for and prepare for those impacts, which is adaptation. So we didn't really focus on greenhouse gas emissions, emissions reduction, that sort of thing. We were really focused on climate change itself and the impacts. And the goal really was to help residents, any decision maker, and that's a really broad term we used in this assessment, to better understand how climate change might impact them and their work and their communities, and then to be able to take action and plan for it. Who developed it? Well, we at NYSERDA coordinated the assessment, but it was really developed by a very broad swath of individuals across organizations and across expertise and experience levels. We really wanted to bring that kind of on-the-ground perspective to the development of these. Oh, sure. Oh. So we brought together almost 80 different experts to actually develop the technical working, to bring together for them as the technical work group members to develop the technical chapters, which I'll talk about in a moment. But then we also had more than 160 additional individuals who were advising those groups. So there are a lot of folks involved in this. The assessment does include projections of future climate conditions in New York, and those were developed by Columbia University. There is a peer-reviewed technical report, which was published by the New York Academy of Sciences, and that each of those chapters is one of these sectors here that you can see on the slides, and those were developed by those technical working groups that I just mentioned. That report talks about the impacts, adaptation strategies, includes some case studies, and we've also developed some communication materials as well. So, what's available on the website? I'm going to try to go through this rather quickly because I don't want to take up Dr. Steger's time, but I'll do my best. There's a lot here. So climate projections is the first thing. There is a detailed, in-depth chapter that will really give you a lot of information on how the climate is changing in the state. But we also have on the website a summary that will give you more of a highlight and overview if we want to check that out first, and then see where you want to delve into the bigger chapter. The data is available for the projections on the site as well. We have them in PDF table form, which is easy to look at and not great for usefulness, usability. So we do now also have them on Open New York, which is the state's data clearinghouse. So here you can find the projections data in interactive format. You can sort, filter, search. You can export and download the data. So this is a really nice way if you actually want to kind of use the data in your own modeling or things like that. The projections are available for 12 different regions of the state. We also, so these cover things that you would probably think about: average temperature and precipitation, extreme events like hot days, heat waves, cold days, heavy precipitation, and how those are going to change in the future. Also degree days, heating and cooling degree days, if those are of interest to you and your work, and sea level rise as well. For the chapter information, we have that available in several different ways. One is by sector, so for each of those 8 sectors that was on previous slide, there is again a very in-depth chapter, and each of these chapters is probably 60 to 100 pages each. There's a lot of really good information and detail in these chapters. If you just want a summary first to see if you want to delve deeper, we have that on the website. There are case studies that were developed for each sector that look into, some of them look at how climate change is already impacting a particular community or a business or an industry in the state. Some of them look at how there's adaptation going on. Some of them look at both. So there's a lot of different kinds of information there in the case studies as well. And then we do have fact sheets for each sector as well. These are 2-page fact sheets. So again, real high level. But if this is something that you think you might want a handout for, these are great for that because these are formatted in a printable format. We also have the information by region. So if you want to know what's going on in your particular region, you can go to the map and click on it, and it'll give you highlights for that region. Now, I'll note that these are not comprehensive. Like, there's a ton of stuff happening in all of these regions that we couldn't put on these region pages, but it's really just to give you give you some highlights, maybe point out a couple of iconic sectors or businesses that are really important to that particular region, and really try to make it more personal and bring a sense of place to how these impacts are affecting the state. We have sections on equity and justice. We did have each chapter make sure that they had sections in their chapters talking about equity and justice, as well as indigenous peoples and tribal nations and the impacts of climate change on those communities. So in the chapters, we have those. On the summaries, we have that. And we also have sections, more synthesis products on the site that kind of give you some context and background information, but then also bring together the relevant information from all of the chapters. So if you're interested, for example, on how climate change is affecting all of, I got it. How climate change is affecting indigenous peoples, for example. You don't have to go through digging through every chapter to pull that all out. It's synthesized for you in one place. And then if you want to dig deeper, you can certainly go do that. We recently have now a figures gallery online. So all of the graphics and charts and figures from the assessment are here. So if you want to use them for presentations, for reports, whatever you'd like to do with them, they are here for you. They are have the captions, have the titles, they tell you how to cite them and how to use them. So please feel free to make use of these. All right, so going on to some of the findings. So I'm going to start with some what we're calling summary findings. For each of the chapters, we had them pull out key findings for their chapter. So they pulled out maybe 5 or so points that they felt were really important that they wanted to highlight and bring forward. So those are at the start of every chapter. But we also did something similar for the assessment as a whole. And these were really kind of ended up being themes we saw throughout the chapters. So I'm not going to go through them all. There's a bunch of them on the site, but I'll pull out a few of them. One here is under a lower emission scenario, climate change impacts across the state will be substantial. So it's extremely important that we continue to reduce our emissions because that's going to determine how bad the impacts are that we're going to feel from climate change. So we do not want to stop doing that. But we do need to acknowledge and recognize that we have to start adapting to climate change as well, current and future climate change, because we're already experiencing it. And that's necessary to safeguard our communities in the state. So we really need to be doing both. Second one I want to pull out here, the frequency and intensity of extreme events such as heavy rainstorms, seasonal droughts, and heat waves are projected to increase. And what I really want to bring out here is that this is going to happen across the state. Particularly for things like heat waves, I wanted to note that we're going to be experiencing them here. It's not something we generally think about when we're in the northern parts of the state as something we really have to worry about. But when you look at the projections, it is something we're going to have to start thinking about sooner rather than later. So I just wanted to bring that out, that this is something that we're going to be experiencing all across the state. New York State residents and communities that are marginalized or suffer from legacies of displacement or discrimination are more vulnerable to climate impacts. So communities of color, indigenous communities, low-income communities, all of these populations also often have a greater physical exposure to climate hazards, and then those vulnerabilities can be exacerbated by discriminatory processes and practices. So, for example, indigenous communities are directly threatened by climate hazards like sea level rise and things like that. But additionally, many cultural practices and traditions are closely tied to the land and ecosystems, which are also extremely vulnerable to climate change. So just wanted to note the recognition and attention to the needs of these different underserved and overburdened communities are really critical elements of equitable and effective resilience planning. And last one I want to note, so there's a lot of doom and gloom when you talk about climate change. And, for good reason. But, there is some hope out there. Every community, every sector in the state has the potential to contribute to innovative climate solutions that reduce vulnerabilities, foster resilience, and enhance equity. It's really just to give that little bit of beacon of hope that, yeah, there's a lot of awful stuff coming and happening, but we can do something about it. So we just need to think about that and acknowledge it and move forward with that. Just kind of centering equity, again, just coming back to that theme, in adaptation and resilience actions, and also aligning these actions with greenhouse gas reduction strategies is really crucial for our overall climate change strategy. Let's talk a little bit about cascading impacts. So these are chains or series of connected impacts, where you have one impact leading to another one, leading to another one. You can kind of think about these as indirect impacts, so climate change might not directly cause a particular outcome down the line, but all of these impacts lead to each other, and eventually we'll get to that outcome and that consequence. So these are often cross-sector. For example, if you have a power outage, which is generally thought of as being in the energy sector, that can cause issues in the health sector because some medical equipment can't work without power. Some forms of transportation don't work without power. So these are kind of cascading impacts across sectors. And I'll give you a couple of examples here too. So one thing that we have issues with in the state are invasive species, and the hemlock woolly adelgid is one of those. So as temperatures rise, we get these adelgid insects being able to overwinter more, they survive better, and they destroy and kill hemlock trees, which I actually have experienced on my own property, which has just been devastating, just to see how the ecosystem on my tiny little property has changed with the loss of these hemlocks because of this insect. So we get loss of hemlocks. Those trees are often found near streams, and they shade those streams and cool the streams. If we lose those hemlocks, the streams warm, and then we lose fisheries like the brook trout that are cold water species and can't survive in warmer temperatures, and that then can have an impact potentially on tourism when you have these folks who are coming to specifically fish for brook trout, and there aren't any trout anymore. One other example. Sorry, the formatting here is not great. I'm not sure what happened there in the transfer. But for example, if you get a strong storm, that can lead to flooding, that can lead to washed out roads. Without the roads, maybe you can't get deliveries made. If you can't get deliveries, maybe some people can't get their medications delivered. So it's really things that you might not necessarily immediately think of off the bat are going to be impacts and consequences of climate change. I guess I'm talking a little faster than I did in my practice run. I've got some time. So adaptation to climate change requires a systems approach. There's a few things I wanted to talk about here. First is interconnectedness. The biggest thing I think I learned from this entire assessment project is how connected everything is, and how connected everything is to climate change. It was made really clear to me, and it's really important that, kind of going back to that cascading impacts thing, that as we're trying to plan for climate change and impacts, that we think about these interconnections and don't just think about a single impact and try to focus on fixing that, because there are other things that come from that that we need to be thinking about as well. Another one is this whole of community, which is a term that's coming more into use lately. And it's really about decision-making not being siloed as well. So not only do we need to think about the different systems being interconnected and different topics, but also the different parts of a community, how they are connected. So as we're making decisions, we need to bring together all of the parts of our communities. So community members need to be at the table, tribal nations need to be at the table, different agencies, organizations with different expertise, different experience, different perspectives. All of these different individuals and organizations need to be at the table when we're making climate change planning decisions. Consider the most vulnerable, again, coming back to that theme. Too often, vulnerable groups are left out of the conversation. So you may come to mind minorities, low-income folks, but also those who are aging, those with limited mobility. These are also very vulnerable populations to climate change, and we need to make sure they are at the table. And that we are not making decisions for and about them, but they are there with their experience and helping to make decisions as well. And finally, scenario planning. This is just a way to help think through the interconnections and possible outcomes out there and help manage uncertainty. It can be really overwhelming when you try to think about all of this interconnectedness, all of these different impacts, and you're trying to figure out what the heck do I do? What do I focus on? So scenario planning can help with that, and it's really just, you think about, all right, here's a thing that happens. What could come from that? And then what could come from that? And what things are impacted? What's the outcome of that? But then also, what do we want the outcome to be? What do we want it to look like? And how do we get there? So the scenario planning is just a different way of thinking through things. It's not necessarily modeling, it's discussion, it's creative thinking to get to some of these planning decisions. Finally, to wrap up, climate change is a threat multiplier. And really that just means that it's going to make worse all of the stresses that are already existing, even without climate change. So for example, coming back to the health example again, climate change is increasing the need for health services. As we kind of mentioned here, there are certain populations that are going to be worse affected by climate change. So as the climate changes, those impacts get worse. So it's going to be increasing need for these health services. At the same time, the health services themselves are going to be impacted. The facilities might be in floodplains. As we said, the roads might wash out and they might not be able to deliver their services. And this is an industry that is already stretched with resources, with staffing. So to put even more on this industry and this sector is just another way of again how climate change is multiplying that threat and making it worse. Another one that's probably, hopefully, fairly obvious is the stresses for farmers. So this industry is already very strapped, very stretched with resources. They're already very weather dependent. So as we get more weather extremes, more damage that requires unanticipated expenditures, shortening operational windows, these stressors are just going to get compounded as climate change piles on. So addressing climate change includes both adapting to these direct impacts, but also managing the existing non-climate stressors. So we want to think about the things that are already stressing our communities and our systems, see if we can reduce those stresses at the same time we try to reduce the climate change impacts themselves. And finally, just bringing it all together again, adaptation to climate change requires a systems thinking approach. So thinking about all the interconnectedness, making sure we're not making decisions in a silo. This is really a key and critical component of climate change planning. That's what I got.
Thank you, Amanda. That was really great. A great overview of what the state is thinking about and how progressive the state is being in terms of the outreach and the planning and tying in all the sectors. So really appreciate that. So our next speaker is Dr. Curt Steger, who's a professor of natural sciences at Potsdam College. He is a scientist, an author, and an educator in the fields of environmental science, climate change, and paleoclimatology. He has conducted research across the world, including the Arctic, here in the Adirondacks, and the Antarctic, and many other places. He is an author of several books, many of which you can find in our beautiful bookstore here at the Wild Center, and as well as publications and other articles, including in National Geographic and the New York Times. He was also named the Science Professor of the Year for New York State by the Carnegie Case Foundation in 2013. So it's my pleasure to welcome you, Curt, as our next speaker.
I'm not Curt.
You're lucky. Clicky is here, thanks. Well, thanks for the introduction, Zoe, thanks. And I do want to urge you to make use of the New York State Climate Impacts Assessment. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource, and the science is rock solid and really important for all of us. What I'd like to do here for the next 15, 20 minutes is burrow in a little closer to the Adirondacks where we live and show you some of the things we're seeing happening around us, mainly in the uplands, and things we're documenting at Paul Smith College with students, faculty, and staff. So just a reminder, we've had a really wonderful, classic winter this winter, right? 2 months of beautiful powder, perfect conditions, cold but not too cold. Maybe we want to, no, let's keep the lights down, that's good. But let's remember what it was like last winter and the winter before that, right? So I want you to focus here on climate more than weather. So remember, weather is a short-term thing, right? It could even say maybe the weather this winter was wonderful. Climate is a trend. It's something that happens over the long term. I don't think we need, whatever, I'm not going to pay attention to the lights. You guys decide. So yeah, so the climate is a long-term thing. And that's what we're going to be talking about here. The ups and downs are not that important to the trends. And so one way to maybe think of it is this image here of a road going up into the Adirondacks from the valley below, right? You have the ups and the downs on the way. It's the overall trip up is the climate trend that we're going to be talking about here. So I won't show you too many nerdy graphs, but some are important, right? These are weather data from the Adirondacks from 3 weather stations, Tupper Lake, Dannemora, and Indian Lake, combined together for comparison to the global picture. So I've got a temperature curve here in the middle. In red, I got the blue down below for precip. And then that black squiggly line up on top is the global temperatures of the last century. And quick takeaways here for what's happening. It's going up, especially since the 70s. And it's going up faster than the global average. It's not quite twice as fast, but it's way up there for a significantly faster. And that makes sense because we're so far north. It's actually, the Arctic is warming faster than the planet as a whole for various reasons. We're close enough to be feeling that as well. And then as far as precip goes, that's also been going up since the 70s. And that time frame is not coincidental. That's roughly the last half century is when the human impacts on global climate really launched off. So you can probably predict, even without a climate model, that this trend is likely to continue around here. So bottom line is, I want to focus on winter here, although we're getting summer impacts too. The bottom line is our winters are becoming shorter and milder on average as the global trend. And you can see this not just from charts, but just paying attention to what's going on around us and talking to our neighbors. So here's a caretaker up on Upper St. Regis Lake, Pete McConville. When he took over the caretaking here on Upper St. Regis Lake, he noticed on the wall of the tool shed that former caretakers have been writing down when the ice left on the lake for year after year after year. So he was continuing that too. And it basically shows what we're seeing on lakes all over the North Country, which is that we're getting less ice. Either the lakes are freezing later because it's a later start to winter, thawing earlier because the winter was milder and shorter, or both. And what I've got here is one chart that's pretty simple to read. On the very bottom here, you got this timeline going back 200 years. It's the longest ice record it's from Lake Champlain. And I put a little asterisk for every winter that did not freeze completely between Burlington and Plattsburgh, the main basin of the lake. And if you read it from left to right, you say, well, the whole 1800s, there were 3 asterisks, and then more and more and more recently until it's normal not to freeze. So I did check it out this year. I heard rumors that it froze and heard rumors it didn't. So we took a trip to Burlington for lunch and talked to the ferry operators, and they said, oh yeah, it was frozen over. They were breaking ice. And so we were saying, well, isn't that more trouble for you all to have to break the ice? And they said, no, we prefer it, because if you don't have the ice, the winter storms are a rough ride. And the cold waves in winter are denser, so they hit the boats more powerfully as well. So they actually prefer having the ice, they told me. So then there was another interesting thing. I wonder where that picture came from. That's funny. So anyway, don't look at the top there. But, ooh, and it's sideways. This is very cool. So it's a great story. Emily Russell from North Country Public Radio told me she'd been down to Old Forge, looked in the visitor center, and on the wall is a chart showing monthly snowfall in Old Forge going back to the 1960s. As you may well be aware, Old Forge is a snowmobile mecca for the North Country, and the economy depends on that. So being a nerd, I plotted out the data, and that black line over to the right there shows the snowfall dropping off over time as the temperature has been going up, which makes sense. A lot more of the precip is coming as rain rather than snow. So when I saw the numbers on there, to the left, you see how high those peaks are. That's a lot of snow. What, 400 inches? That can't be right. Well, I put this on Facebook, and I got answers from people saying, I remember those years when I had to dig down to get into my house. So these are observationally confirmed data here. These have, of course, economic impacts. As you get less reliable winters, that can affect your economy, especially in a place like Old Forge. If I'm not mistaken, I've been told that Old Forge has to rent a lot of the trails that the snowmobilers use, and they have to rent them in advance, like a month in advance, regardless of whether the snow is there or not. So it's a gamble for them, economic risk they take to say, is March going to be worth having the trails or not? So the reliability of winter is really important for people as well. And then, of course, in the summer, we've got the other things. Summer's getting longer and hotter and wetter on average, too. We see this with the rising levels of rivers and lakes, with all of those changing the baseline, making us at more risk of the heavy events that are also coming. So these are things we can see. What comes next? Well, we just heard of the projections from the New York State Climate Impact Assessment. 10 years ago, Mary Phil and I did a similar study just for the Champlain Adirondack region and modeling. We got basically the same results. So we had 16 climate models projecting just for the Adirondacks and Lake Champlain area. They all anticipate warming, as we could just do without a climate model. The more greenhouse gases, the warmer it gets. But they're consistent with that, and also suggesting that the most intense warming is likely to happen in winter going forward. Okay. So what does this mean? Well, I'm a science nerd, and like we were saying, I worked around the world on climate stories, but when you start studying it where you live, there's an emotional impact, a personal impact, when you realize you're talking about the place you love and and people too. So I've been asking around, what do you think of this, and how does it affect you? And there was a really interesting comment I got from Chuck Bruja at the Mountaineer down in the Ausable Valley when I asked him. They sell winter sports gear, and I said, what does it mean for a business like you to have the winters being less and less reliable? And he said, where we live defines who we are, and winter defines the North Country. I just had never thought of it till he put it in those words, like, why are we not the Blue Ridge? They have pretty mountains. I used to live down there. They got banjos and good food and all kinds of stuff. It's not the Adirondacks. And we have our own culture that's developed around the winter. So it means something to us to have winter, to tell us who we are. And we identify ourselves as the Olympic region, right? Because we've had 2 of those Olympic Games. And that's the Winter Olympics, not the Summer Olympics, right? It's part of our heritage and our economy to have this. The unreliability of the winter is a thing. This was an interesting study, came out a couple of years ago, where these authors took the former Winter Olympic cities around the world, looked at their climate projections for the rest of the century, and calculated which ones will have reliable enough winter conditions to have a Winter Olympics again. We're marginal. Lake Placid, that's what that black arrow is there. The red ones are unreliable. There's only one left that could reliably be counted on to have good conditions for Winter Olympics. That's Sapporo, Japan, and that has something to do with unusual ocean currents around there that keep it cool. Yeah, so, you know, this would have been a great winter for Winter Olympics. There's talk of maybe having a partial Winter Olympics here next winter, you know, but looking at the last two winters, So, yeah. We also see kind of on the more local community scale, our identity really counts on this too, like Saranac Lake where I live. We have a century of winter carnivals and ice palaces like that. When you don't have a reliably cold winter, you're at risk of having your ice palace melt, like it almost did in 2023 and also last year. Found a historic photo of what the ice blocks used to look like. In 1959, you see how thick those are. And then what the comparison is here. The folks that are farming the ice are literally farming the ice now to make sure that it stays thick enough, so they shovel off the snow on top of the ice on the bay where they harvest it with traditional tools and saws and things like that. Folks who've done it for years said we prefer to have at least 12 inches. This year was 16 inches. The last two winters, it was 9 inches. We were afraid maybe we wouldn't have an ice palace. And you can see this then in nerdy data charts. So I took the data from Indian Lake, counted the number of nights or days basically over the last 100 years where you had a really old time cold winter when it was minus 20 or colder, like that. So you go out in the woods, you hear the trees popping, you inhale, your nose hairs freeze, the snow squeaks when you walk on it, that kind of deep cold. That's decreasing, shows you the line dropping down there. And there have been quite a few winters now since the 1970s, they're circled there, where we didn't have any experience of it below minus 20. We had some this year, but not much. If you just point that line farther into the future, that would mean no more deep cold by 2080, if it's a straight line, which may or may not be. So this is something we're looking at. What's this going to mean for us? What will our winter carnivals be like, our winter sports industry, and things like that? And of course, there are other things, the informal use of the snow and ice, like on the left, backyard hockey, and extra, oh, go ahead, yeah. That's actually a famous hockey player, some of you may know him. And extra income for people who plow driveways, things like that. People keep track of that and tell me, yeah, when I have a good snow winter, I make extra money. I can go to a restaurant sometimes. I support the local businesses more. So we have all these knockoff effects too. So I'm going to leave the data there. I'll let you know that we have a website too. We have a new climate initiative at Paul Smith College and the Watershed Institute, where we've put up 4 reports on the climate change in the Adirondacks, the change in the animals and plants, or the phenology in the Adirondacks, the effects on people, and how do you talk to somebody who doesn't believe it's happening? So those are up there on the Watershed Institute site under the science thing there, and we're also going to link it to the main website of the college as well. So it's got information that students, faculty, and staff have been doing, and it's same thing, PDF report, PowerPoint with the photos like you were seeing here and charts you can use, and Excel sheets with the raw data. So that is the resource. So my closing thoughts are, moving forward, one of the good things is resilience is in our nature as Adirondackers. It's a tough place to live, and it always has been, right? People have been living here for 12, 13,000 years since the ice left, and found ways to do it. And sometimes that difficulty binds our communities more closely than other places. Like here's the Winter Carnival. It was either last year or the year before when it rained. You know, some Winter Carnival, huh? Well, we did it anyway. And everybody was out. all ages, all economic classes, right wing, left wing, in between, whatever, we're all there. We were Adirondackers doing this. So that gives me hope, and seeing a room full of people like this too, with all our resources and talents, it's a great time to do things. One of the things to watch for is other people are going to want to come here too. They already do. But some of them are being driven here, right? You think about the climate changes we're seeing coming here, and it's significant, but you go out west, it's fires, massive fires, and drought, running out of water. You go down along the coast, there's the hurricanes. You come up the coast, and it's burning hot cities in the summer. People don't want to live that way, and they look at us and the rest of the Northeast and see us as a refuge. So talk about amplifying effects. Well, that drives the housing prices up with the climate migrants coming here who have resources, right? So we've got a housing shortage anyway. That's only going to get worse unless we do something, and fortunately we are. We should keep pushing for that, to welcome new people in. You know, that's where a lot of the wonder of our community comes from. But also, you know, welcome people to the Adirondacks, but also keep it the Adirondacks. And find ways to do that. We got to make it so people can live here and work here, have affordable housing. And, you know, fortunately, we've got projects like this one going on in Saranac Lake. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm told there's a full spectrum of people who are expected to be able to live there, from wealthier folks to less wealthy folks. And I think there's a discount for artists as well. So could be really good. So I'll leave you with this. We're all in this together. And the stronger our Adirondack communities are, and our sense of fellow humanity as fellow Adirondackers, the better off we're going to be. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to move into our, we have all kinds of plenary sessions this morning. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Tony David, who's Director of the Environment Division at the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. Tony has 22 years of service in the Environment Division at the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. His division seeks to expand the sovereign authority of the SRMT to manage and restore natural resources that sustain the cultural identity of the Mohawk community of Akwesasne. His division is guided by the principles of capacity development for improved self-governance, enhanced communication, and adaptive management. Mr. David is a recipient of the 2017 Environmental Champion Award from the US EPA, and he was recently reappointed by the International Joint Commission to serve on the US section of the International Lake Ontario-St. Lawrence River Board. He's also an avid cross-country skier just like me, so I love the fact that you're here for many reasons, but that's one of them, so welcome.
Okay, good morning. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's great to be here. Actually, this was a development by chance out of a dinner party, Chili Fest at the Saranac Carnival. But anyway, here I am. Just want to say, first of all, Seagos Kanagoga, Dahalat Dajungets, Akwesasne Tikanagale, in the Mohawk language. Just said that he runs is what they call me, and I come from a place called Akwesasne. And I wanted to jump right in here, and first just a little bit of background. You know, this gives me a chance to sort of show off a little bit with, we have an outdoors-oriented family, and if you live in the North Country, how can you not, really? I love where we are, I love where we live, and it's just seems to be the perfect blend of all resources. We have the mighty river, we have boating, we have fishing, but we're just a short drive from the Adirondacks, where we can experience the trails, the mountains, the beautiful views, amber-colored water, and everything that comes along with that. But just want to say, where we live, this place, is a part of our identity, and I think that's something that all of us can get behind. But, my talk is a little different from what I usually do, more of a practitioner in applied science and self-governance. I work for a sovereign Indian tribe. We're about an hour and a half north of here, right on the St. Lawrence River, beautiful part of the river. And the Mohawk territory of Akwesasne is actually bisected by the U.S.-Canada border. So I work for, I guess, what you would call the civic government on the southern portion of that territory. And as Jen said, I've been with the tribe for over 22 years, and so I've been doing a lot. And in my time, I've noticed a lot of trends, a lot of things happening. One of which is somehow I became one of the elders within the division, and started actually hiring the children of former colleagues of mine. So I've reached that stage. Thank you. And it's been a bit of a transition, but I feel like, talking to my staff, gather around, kids. Let me tell you a story about miles and miles of river ice, as far as the eye could see. And we got to the point where it was so bad we had to call in the icebreakers just so spring would come, right? In one of those times, the Coast Guard loaded my little Toyota onto the deck of the ship, and I had a one-way trip from Beauharnois, Quebec to the locks in Messina, just to observe that ice-breaking mission. And it was really beneficial to be a part of that. But, this talk is following Curt's, and, we have so much information to share. Curt, where are you? I got some data to share with you. But, similar story on the St. Lawrence River. The duration of ice cover on the St. Lawrence is drastically declining, and it's setting in later in the year, and it's departing, it's leaving earlier in March. That's creating an opportunity for things like the St. Lawrence Seaway to maybe extend their navigation season, and there's a whole discussion that goes along with that. But there's just so much information out there about the measurable and observable impacts of what we're seeing. And, and many of you in this room are directly involved with the collection of those data and the objective data. And these help us inform our understanding of the risks and help us make more informed decisions. And for some of us, it can be a matter of life and death. If you think about the stability of ice on the St. Lawrence River, people are losing their lives every year. And when that stability of normal dedicated routes between the islands on the St. Lawrence River becomes in jeopardy, things happen. So obviously, making informed decisions is kind of the theme of adaptive management and under climate change, but overall we're just looking at these destabilizing forces that are changing the weather patterns on a continental scale. And it's not just here, it's everywhere. But this also includes some episodes of very extreme weather events. And so I just wanted to bring some of those examples of things that we're observing. And ice jams are a huge thing, right? And ice jams basically you need two things. You need ice, so when you have ice, that's great. But when you have these sudden changes in snow melts, what they call a freshet, all of that water rushes into the river, lifts the ice up, sends it downstream. And so in this, on the Lower Grass River in Messina, there is a Superfund remediation that's been going on for decades. And actually, this was one of my first projects that I worked on at the early parts of my career. And, all damages truly are a failure of planning. And when we design things to a 100-year flood scenario or a 500-year flood scenario, the fact of the matter is those thresholds keep changing, right? The 100-year from 10 years ago no longer exists, right? And now everybody is focusing on 500-year planning. And that may not be enough, because even those thresholds continue to grow and change. And in this particular, one of the results of this event was a ice jam and a scour pool into the cap materials, which exposed heavily contaminated polychlorinated biphenyls and redistributed them into the environment. So post-remedy, the remedy was wrapped up in 2001. We should be talking about a recovery success story, but instead we have this redistribution of contaminants. And so that happened in 2021. The repairs began the following 2 years, And then Hurricane Debbie arrived. Once again, the cap, which was designed to withstand a 500-year flow event, did not perform as expected. You know, but this is partially because we had such an extreme precipitation event. The highest recorded flows ever in this river, and resulted in more damages. So the story goes on, but they're involved right now with repairing about 13 acres of this cap. So, you know, we really need to think about permanence. We need to think about resilience, and those standards need to be constantly updated. Lake Ontario. The highest water levels observed in 2017, only to be eclipsed by an even higher event in 2019. And all of those flows from the outflow of Lake Ontario is controlled by the Moses Saunders Dam, which is in Messina. All of those high flows went through the territory of Akwesasne, the highest flows in modern history, modern era. So lots of issues going on there. So, you know, where we are located, Akwesasne, we're not only receiving the impacts from the entire Upper Great Lakes and Lake Ontario, but we're also receiving impacts that are coming from the headwaters within the Adirondacks. And now we have this new development of extreme events, which are localized events within sub-watersheds. And Hurricane Debbie on the territory. And there is a dearth of information about flood zones and elevations and inundation, and we're just trying to play catch up with all of that. And so this was a response that happened this past summer. And, you know, in addition to these new threats, we also have a housing shortage within the territory of Akwesasne. You may or may not know that on the territory you cannot get a traditional mortgage. You can't just go to a bank and get a loan because there's no way that a private lender can issue a lien on that property as a guarantee for their loan. So it's very limited opportunities, and now those lenders are starting to ask questions. Well, what's the flood risk on the territory? You don't have a map. Well, somebody needs to give us some kind of a certificate. So this is one of the greatest challenges that we're working with on the territory, and it's only going to get worse, right? So there's definitely a need for better information. Again, more extreme weather events, swings in temperatures, ice jam on the St. Regis River in 2008. So. You know, but the next part of my talk, I wanted to focus on some other areas that a little bit out of my normal spiel. You know, but we can agree that these events are a problem, but for a magnitude of reasons. But we can't seem to agree on what sort of action is needed, and we're stuck in this wash, rinse, and repeat methodology of recovery. And there's a quote from this fascinating book called "The Geography of Risk." It's written by a journalist, Gilbert Gall, and the quote was that floods are an act of God, but flood damages are the result of acts of man. And I truly take that message to heart because, as I said before, all damages are a result of poor planning, and it's just really a failure of our imagination or a lack of access to data, which is holding us back and making these issues worse for us. This past year, I was in a meeting with our different departments within tribal government, which included the Office of Emergency Management, Planning and Infrastructure, Construction, DOT, and the Environment Division. We were all just talking about how the cumulative impacts of all of these events and extreme weather that they were having, and they were just so frustrated that we keep doing the same thing over and over again. And the guy from the DOT was just like, it's not working, we can't keep this up. And I just had to step back and you know, we all, within that room, we all had this collective understanding that something needs to change. We needed to take action. But, you know, when we step out of that room and go out into the public, into the real world, and try and take action, you know, that's really where the work begins, because that understanding does not necessarily transfer easily without comprehensive communication strategies. And the challenge that what comes next is one, I think, a struggle that we all have, and is that broad interest in understanding and acceptance of the facts. Because support for viable solutions requires buy-in, and that part is so difficult. It's probably the most critical aspect of the work that we do. No one benefits from the report that isn't read, or plans that sit on a shelf and collect dust, or worse yet, corrective action that is imposed without proper understanding. We have to have the courage to get out there and tell our stories and leave room for contributions from others. And, you know, I just want to say that Curt just gave a master class in communication, right? So he's a tough act to follow for sure. But, you know, his presentation style is something that he wasn't taught. You know, it's something that just naturally grew because he's a storyteller, and it's not about the complexities of the graphs and all this other stuff. It's about putting information up there, but telling this story, and it's you know, the communication of complex ideas sometimes is controversial, results in plans relying in communication strategies. But let's be honest, it's an area that most of us are not really trained, right? A typical science and engineering education is very rigid, right? You know, your presentation format follows X, Y, Z. And every opportunity to share your data is an opportunity to break the mold and tell a story. We also need to be better listeners. Our work in improving preparedness, increasing resilience, requires creating opportunities for all contributions, even our toughest critics. In mutual understanding, there is mutual value, and today that is absolutely critical. So, tell the story of your data. Invite contributions from others. I attended this science communication workshop that put on by Stony Brook, and it involved exercises of improv, and it was really interesting to see that you know, a room full of scientists and engineers doing. It is absolutely absurd, you know, just doing improv and so I'll just describe to you what this. It was an exercise where you had a partner, and you had to mirror what your partner was doing, and so when it was your turn to lead, you know, you do making funny hand gestures, and you're trying to see, you know, trying to do this choreographed, like a dance, and, you know, it was, I had this moment of, like, an epiphany, like this light bulb went off in my head, because in doing so, the more complicated, like, the movements that I wanted to make, right, I wanted to show off and do some grandiose thing, right, you know, but the person my partner kept falling behind, right, and so the moment that I realized it wasn't about me, it wasn't about what I wanted to do, it was about this person who's following along and taking my cues, where we're on this journey together, and if they were to fall behind, that would be my fault. During that exercise, yeah, and you know, so when we use complicated graphs, we use complicated jargon, we use all these things. These are barriers for improving public understanding, and we really need to step out of that and be more of a storyteller, like Curt just did. Just a wonderful job, and you know, that more of that, please. And why that's critically important is because they may find ways to identify with your work, and that's absolutely critical. Hopefully, they may even care, and that's the importance of storytelling. They may support your research because something you said made them care about it. They may support policies or legislation that reduce future damages. That's our common goal. And they may support the change that is needed. So if you give 10 presentations on a single topic to 10 different groups, it may require 10 different approaches depending on who's in the audience. And think about that. We have to do better when it comes to telling stories and create this growing pool of mutual understanding, fact-based understanding in terms people can relate to, and care for others is just something that we frankly need more of. And I just wanted to leave, if I have time, I just wanted to leave with a couple examples. So, you know, this is on territory on the banks of the St. Regis River. You know, so this is a person who was impacted by the flood events. I believe this one was for an ice jam, and he bought his retirement home, and he wanted to have his nice quiet place along the river, and having some information about, some experience about working with floods, he actually brought in Phil to bring up the land, but he just didn't have enough data, the right data, right? And this is a solvable problem. So these are the types of instances that we want to prevent moving forward. There's always this was an example of having the willingness, but not the resources, right? It's the needed informational resources. It's one example. Another example is the Hogansburg Dam decommission. So just a little bit of background. This is the first impassable barrier to fish off of the St. Lawrence River, and its removal by the tribe in 2016 reconnected the St. Lawrence River with the lower part of the St. Regis watershed. It reconnected about 500 river and stream miles of aquatic habitat. So, a major accomplishment for the tribe. But also, we were able to take this project, which was a hazard, and remove that public hazard and get the control of the land and the resources back into the control of the tribal government. But believe it or not, this project, with all its benefits, was still a controversy. And there were those within our community who were very much opposed to its removal, mostly out of fear, But I had one individual in particular whom would frequently lock horns in public meetings, and and especially nowadays that we found this more common, that personal attacks are part of that. But I came to this place of acceptance that this person who was fighting me tooth and nail about this project cared about this research every bit, this resource every bit as much as I did, right? And he was just afraid of change. And so I had to think in his terms, what he was saying, cut through the personal attacks to what exactly was his concerns, and how can I study those? How can I evaluate and properly mitigate those risks? Because I want to leave no stone unturned, right? The success of this project relies on managing risk, really. And ultimately, this person became a source of inspiration for me. Like, I wanted to make sure that everything that he was telling me was taken into consideration. And, it became ultimately, this was many years ago now, but it was a tremendously successful project. We didn't have any issues, stayed within cost. And all of the concerns, particularly for the concerns for immediate impacts to fisheries, were well managed and were not an issue. But I wanted to make sure going in that was properly mitigated. So, that's something that you don't learn in school. At least I've been out of school for, maybe they teach that in school, in universities now, but, that was something that I had to learn sort of the hard way. And all of my new staff coming into the Environment Division, since the pandemic, more than half of our staff are brand new to us. And so it's an opportunity to bring them in and give them mentorship, and two of the required readings that we within tribal government. There's a couple books, one called Crucial Conversations and Crucial Accountability, if you're familiar with those. Totally changed the way that I interact with people. It's tremendously helpful in taking the next step with our science and communicating with that in public and working towards greater engagement. And I think if I'm out of time, I can stop there. Okay, one more example. So I was appointed to the Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Board in 2017 in January, and then just a few months later, massive record-breaking flooding happens on the Lake Ontario. And so you could think this was a tough crowd, right? So I volunteered to actually present on behalf of the board, and this was one of my colleagues from the Army Corps. This whole situation was set up, with the elected officials up there. We're down below, looking up to them. It wasn't really about exchange of information, right? we were there for a roast. You know, so I knew going in that that was going to be a very difficult situation. I understood the audience, which were 300 very upset citizens. And we also had the media there. And so we huddled up and totally revamped the entire talk. Most of the complex slides about stuff and algorithms and all that we just threw out. We just told the story about what happened and why. And as far as like the success in this situation was not about like convincing that we were not at fault. It was not about saying that the new outflow regulation plan was perfect, because it's not. The success was framed around just understanding what the baseline facts are, right? You know, you don't have to like it, you know, but at least you can understand the baseline facts of what happened and why, and then that's something that we can build on. We could follow that up with additional meetings and additional focus groups, whatever, on what comes next, but at least starting simple, starting something there. And I think we did really well as can be considered in that situation. You know, I'll bite my tongue, but, you know, this is the real world application of where your knowledge is put to the test and your communication skills are put to the test. So you really need to step outside of your comfort zone, experiment with some things, and, you know, so there's a lot of, you know, so if anybody else has some experiences with similar situations, things that work, things that haven't worked, love to talk with you offline, but, you know, so I think I'll stop there. But it's a great opportunity to come here and share this information and to highlight some of the climate change impacts that are affecting the territory of Akwesasne. So thank you.
All right, since I'm in control of the mic, I just have to note that what Mr. David talked about hit on so many of the important points of climate resilience, such as willingness to learn, the humility to make the mistakes and try again, the importance of meeting people where they are, the dedication to keep on going, and that seed of commonality. Wow, you hit them all, thank you. So it's also a beautiful segue into our next speaker, Mayor Alexandra Jacobs-Wilke from the village of Potsdam. She is upstream, so we're heading upstream now from Akwesasne on the Racket. And I'm going to read her bio. She is the current mayor of Potsdam, where she has dedicated herself to fostering innovation, sustainability, and community engagement. With a deep commitment to the growth and prosperity of her village, she has you know what? This is the old one. So I am going to actually, well, I can read this one, but maybe Mayor Jacobs-Wilke can also add some of the things that we updated in here together. But really, there's so much that she's doing at Potsdam. Actually, I'm going to say a few of my own words about her. So I've had the pleasure of working with Mayor Jacobs-Wilke through the ACORN project, and it is amazing to watch her, how she has rolled up her sleeves, how she has responded to the concerns of her community and been willing to work with them to try to solve issues of flooding, and her willingness to learn together as they all go together. I think her dedication is a great model for leaders in all of our small towns, and I'm very, very proud to introduce her. Oh, and here she is. Thank you.
Slides up here quickly.
All right, good morning. Does anybody need to shake it off for a second? I know there's some folks in the back kind of sitting on the ground. If anybody needs to shift, I do see some empty seats. Please don't be uncomfortable. So I'm Alexandra Jacobs-Wilke. Thank you so much for having me today. I do see some familiar faces in the audience, but I'm just so glad to be here. Don't worry about the bio. I'm here to talk about forgetting and remembering. So this is what I think about when it comes to resiliency in our communities. As, first of all, just a homeowner, a community member, someone who lives and has children and wants to build a future here in the North Country, and then also newly as a local leader. Forgetting and remembering on a personal level, on an individual level, and then as a community, within our institutions. This is what comes to mind when I reflect on the challenges that we have had with environment. So in the village of Potsdam, we're built on the banks of the Racket River. And I apologize, Tony, I'm sure I won't pronounce it correctly, the real name. But the Racket River, traditionally, the village was founded around Fall Island, which was named Fall Island because of the two little waterfalls on either side. There are records from the Potsdam Public Museum talking about how before we built our two hydroelectric dams on either side of that island years ago, it used to be a common occurrence that there would be flooding practically every year in some of these neighborhoods along the river and in certain stretches. And over time, the community resolved to help solve this by building upon natural infrastructure that was already there and then creating their own. So a canal was created, and it's called the Crosstown Canal. And it is fed by little creeks, natural creeks that already were directing flows from our watersheds toward the Racket River. And in some cases, redirecting those into an open-air canal. And when we speak about forgetting and remembering, there's actually a senior citizen who likes to regularly come to village board meetings and complain about traffic and parking. But she once shared how she remembered being a young person. She lives on the same street I do, a few blocks up, Waverly Street. She remembered there's a part where the canal was actually still open air, it was open, and she remembered catching frogs in it as a child and playing in and around the canal as a young person. Well, years later, this is a photo also from the Potsdam Public Museum of the canal being built, and then later, as you can see, being covered up. So we later covered it up. It's running under streets, under our homes, and finds its way to the Racket River. And it's not just one straight line either. It has its tributaries. It branches off in certain places. And speaking of forgetting, we don't actually fully know where it all is underground. Over time, the village has engaged consultants to do with closed circuit TV, those cameras that can go down in there to try to find any obstructions within and try to map it. And we've also had faculty and students from Clarkson University try to map it with ground penetrating radar. But there's still parts that are kind of a mystery to us. And of course, when everything's fine, it still works despite the fact that it's a century old, more than a century old. I believe in some of our studies, it's shown that about a 10-year flood or so, a 10-year storm, it can handle. And it's unseen, right? There's parts where the water is flowing in that you can observe during a storm as it's going into it. And if you were to take a kayak out or something, you could see just past Canal Street, named for the canal, where it's going into the river. But it works, right? And it's under our feet. It's easy to forget about. So this is back in 1947, another photo from the Potsdam Public Museum showing some of the regular flooding that the village had sort of was used to having occur. So if you're once this was built, if you're a homeowner or you're a local elected official, you might not actually know. So this is from a neighbor of mine on Pleasant Street, so just up around the corner from me, used with permission. They're not anywhere near the river. They're not on the banks of the river, let's say. They're not on a FEMA flood map. You would have no idea, unless the previous owners had disclosed something to you when you bought this house, that it could flood like this in your backyard on a relatively regular basis with these storms. The forgetting. And then the remembering. So in 2010, before my time on the village board, there were 22 days in a row of just rain. It was just an incredibly rainy September in the village of Potsdam, New York. And then there was a 3-year storm at the end of that. And it just totally overwhelmed our system. And what happens is, of course, the canal underneath our streets is just completely, it overflows. And the river is going over our streets, up through the grates, and through people's yards and into their homes. And of course, their basements. And most of these people would not have had flood insurance. Some actually, after this, obtained it separately, just understanding the concern. So in the remembering side, at that time, people went to the local government and advocated, what can we do about this? And the village government at the time undertook some studies, as we spoke about already, trying to map the canal, what is there, determined, in some cases, we had actually built water and sewer lines that went through the canal, which were obstructing flow. So we did undertake in 2017 a project in some of the larger sections where those obstructions were in place to redirect our infrastructure lines outside of the canal. And as they went in, it was almost like an archaeological dig. You could see the old sandstone siding and how the old canal had been built. So that took place. And going forward, the village, again, at that time, undertook a larger engineering study to see, is there something we could do to, first of all, do we need to fix the canal at some point? And secondly, can we slow the flow of water into it? So a large study was undertaken, and it identified numerous possible mitigation efforts that we could include, such as on the lower cost end of the scale, removing some additional obstructions within the canal, and then adding some bioswales, some water management upstream to slow the flow of water into it. And then essentially that study was shelved effectively. The village didn't act on it right away. And this is where the forgetting comes in. When you're a new board member and you come into a board, your budget that you're working on, you're so focused on this fiscal year, next fiscal year, some big project that you might have inherited and you know that's coming. There are these unseen projects and costs that we have kind of collectively forgotten about or conveniently forgotten about, but they're still there. It's still under our feet. The next flood is coming. We just didn't really know it. And what happens when you leave a study sitting on the shelf? It becomes kind of outdated and not very useful. So August 9th, 2024, my day job, I work at one of the colleges. I work at SUNY Potsdam, and I had actually run to Jernaby Coffee House to get a coffee with a friend, was leaving the coffee house, and it was one of those storms where you're drenched literally by the time you reach your car. And you're like, wow, this is crazy. But it was a beautiful summer day. It was like one of those warm rainstorms and almost kind of delightful. But I go back to my office, and I was about to leave SUNY Potsdam, and it was raining in the elevators in Raymond Hall. That's that tall administrative building. You know, every SUNY campus pretty much has one. It was raining in the elevators. And I called a physical plant. I said, somebody's got to get over here. And so obviously I didn't get in the elevator. I took the stairs. And then as I'm leaving to get my children from the daycare, we have these large drainage ditches all along the edge of campus, and I've never seen them ever like this in my life, completely overflowing into the streets. And as I'm approaching home, my husband's texting me, this is crazy. Outside of our street was turning more and more into a river by the minute, and he's texting me, be careful where you go. And of course, I went to try to turn, and there's already a fire department vehicle blocking our road. And so I had to go around the block. There's like a little hill around the block from us, and park on the side street and walk home. And as I get there, I'm realizing our streets this is one of those neighbors. I feel like the photo can't capture it. You saw it in Tony's images. I'm a short person, so if I were to walk into the road, it'd be well past my knees, and it was swift water. The streets were rivers, and people's yards were rivers, and it was running effectively through people's homes, across Market Street, blocking traffic. I've never seen anything like it. My neighbors are out on the street trying to figure out what to do, and I wanted to get to the Civic Center to help with the response and get the paperwork to do an emergency declaration, because did I mention this was only my first year as mayor? I've never had to do an emergency declaration before. Can't find the paperwork from the old mayor. So just to walk to the Civic Center, which is normally I could run there in 2 minutes, cutting through a parking lot. I didn't want to walk through the yucky water because it does smell, right? Our wastewater treatment plant couldn't quite keep up. And it's swift. I really didn't want to get knocked over, so I was just trying to see, is there an alternate way to get around? There is literally no way to get around the village of Potsdam. It was near the hospital. It was near our school. It was going through people's yards. It was down Market Street. There was no way to go except through, which is what I did. But following all of this, it's not about me. It's about the people who were impacted. As you all know, we did receive the FEMA designation in the North Country and St. Lawrence County for public assistance for local governments like ours. On the village level, the canal wasn't necessarily damaged by all this. We had to clean it out. We did have municipal damages and staff time and some equipment and debris removal that we're receiving assistance for, and it's very valued, very wonderful. But the vast, vast majority of damages happened on the homeowner level, right? To the individuals, to the business owners, many of whom did not have flood insurance. So we're back to remembering. And what do we know now? This is where, and you have to credit the people. So the residents got together. They created something called the Potsdam Flood Free Coalition. And obviously they're upset. I would be upset too. They're my neighbors, and believe me, they let me know about it, right? By the way, it just so happens my house is just barely uphill enough that we didn't have this type of flood. We were just in the basement pushing the water toward the sump pump. But others clearly were not as fortunate. This is that same home again, flooded again in 2024 after the 2010 floods. So with remembering, that group gets together, and besides just being upset, they really did want to be constructive and get people together. So this is how Sunita and I met each other. They had a coalition come together. Let's look at the old studies. Let's talk about what we're missing. What else has happened in this time? Okay, we let the study sit on the shelf. I'm sure for many reasons. I'm sure it was just expensive to take on, and perhaps the village thought it was worth a gamble to just wait and maybe things wouldn't be as bad again. But moving forward, determined for us to remember, the group thought about how the fact that within that time frame, we also had a farmer who had tile drained his field that drains directly toward our system, making it even worse. And we had the DOT had installed new storm drains all along Route 11 in that same corridor, right in that watershed that feeds toward our canal system, and making things even worse. At the same time, in another watershed on the other side of town, which drains from wetlands, we had, just so happens that May had a beaver dam that had burst, and it had sent a huge amount of flooding toward the other side of town, and then unobstructed, when the rains came again in August, these are homes that are not served by that canal system, but they, with nothing in its way, the water once again flooded all those homes as well. So nature has a way of remembering where it should flow. We have a way of forgetting when it's too complicated to figure out. So these residents got together, and what we did is we came together in a session led by ACORN. There was a wonderful listening session held at Clarkson University, not just for the village of Potsdam, the town, residents from Colton, Canton, and other communities, to talk about what do we need to do. We have to address this. We can't forget it. and we have to make some hard decisions going forward. And so from here on out, I mean, to me, there is no option to forget these, as Tony pointed out, 100-year storms are going to become much more common. 100 seems like a misnomer at this point. So while we may not have been able to predict that a hurricane that started down south would have enough rain hitting our communities to cause so much damage, we know now. And so we have hired for a new engineering study, because unfortunately that's what you have to do. The old ones don't count, and we're looking for solutions. And the most important thing for us is engaging those community members. So we do have a project advisory committee for this, and they're going to help us to make recommendations to the local government. And to me, it's about the remembering. It's about having that knowledge within the community of this is not something we can avoid anymore. And there's going to be costs involved. We'll probably have to get easements. It may be legally complicated. Going near school grounds, it may be just in terms of approvals, very complicated as well. But we need that sense of we can't forget anymore. We have to move forward because climate change isn't forgetting. It's coming in all of our communities in different ways. And so as we move forward, I'm just grateful to my neighbors and friends for their patience, and they're willing to give us one more chance to remember. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I have such gratitude for you sharing those stories of your lived experience and really exemplifying that neighborliness that we keep talking about, the resilience, the grit, the innovation, the problem solving, and the remembering that needs to happen for us to move forward towards those resilient solutions. So thank you for sharing that. I just want to do a quick shout out right now to our amazing Platinum sponsor, 80K Solar. 80K Solar's mission is to create a sustainable future for the Adirondacks. It's a company that harnesses the power of the sun to create that future. And I just want to acknowledge that that their owner, Jim Amon, who's also featured in our Climate Solutions exhibit, just go check out his big photo and some of his work, and Brock Jennings, are so passionate about efficiency and sustainability. We're really, really thrilled and grateful for your presence here today and for supporting the work of everyone here. And just to add that solar energy can help improve the health of the environment, biodiversity, wetlands, and farmlands, and it can also contribute to a healthier future for generations to come. So thank you again to 80K Solar. I would just like to say we're going to move now into workshops. A quick break. Our workshops start at 11:30. The rooms are across the museum. There's a workshop here in the theater, over in the exhibit spaces, and there's also a workshop in our main conference room. To access that, you're going to go outside the main doors of the by the cafe and walk around. That's because our kitchen's kind of in the middle of there. So you're going to walk around the kitchen. There'll be staff there to help you find your way. I hope you have a great time at those workshops, and thank you all again for being here at the Wild Center today.